As for the Davis situation, look, we have a coach, we have a GM here in the building, so you two get to role play here a little bit. Put yourself in the position of Alvin or Dell Demp's spot in the front office. Now that you know definitively, and you probably had your suspicions beforehand, but now that you know definitively that Anthony Davis' plans aren't going to keep him in New Orleans long term, how do you proceed?
You know, it's interesting. I do very little, frankly, and I think if you're Dell Demps, this could not have taken you by surprise. You had to have been in a situation where the moment Rich Paul and Clutch Sports were able to sign Anthony Davis as a client, you had to understand the game was going to be played a different way. And I'm sure this did not take them by surprise. Some of the sound that I got to see yesterday with Drew Holiday talking after practice about his thoughts on it, he was very clearly not surprised. So you can't react now in the next 7 to 10 days as though something of substance has happened. Nothing really should be changing from your viewpoint. You should have had laid out what your expectation is in an AD deal, what you would be willing to accept and what you will not accept. And nothing should change that between now and the deadline. This was done in such a way with a timing that it was meant to create leverage on the part of someone that is not the New Orleans Pelicans. And so what they need to do is stay the course and wait until they can make the deal that they're comfortable with. And if that's at the end of the season, so be it. But I would do very little that I wasn't already planning on doing.
And Coach, if you're Alvin Gentry, aside from having to answer a bunch of questions about this, what changes for you in terms of how you go about your day-to-day and how you talk to your team now that this is the cat's out of the bag?
I think there's an order that you have to go through as the head coach. The first thing is you go in and sit down with your general manager and you say to him, this is what I propose doing right now, because you know he's going to find out very soon, because the players that are in the room when you talk to them are going to tell their agents, and then the agents are going to call him, and he's going to have to deal with all that. So first I want to get his permission that this is what I want to say. I think it's the right thing. Are you okay with that? Then you proceed, and I sit down with Anthony Davis next, alone. And I say to him, listen, this is not a secret, obviously, and we've got to maintain the course that we set out to try and make the playoffs and go as far as we can into the playoffs. Now, do I know Anthony Davis is coming back and going to be part of it, or is he going to be out and not play again for the remainder of the season? Because that's two different things altogether. But assuming that he wants to come back and be part of it after his finger heals up, that type of thing, I have to explain to him we're going to have a team meeting, and I'm going to deal with this in the locker room with you sitting there, and explain that whatever is out in the media, don't think it was hidden from the players by any means.
Right, right.
How are we handling this as a team, and how is that changing our focus on what we're trying to do? Our mission is get as much done as we can while this guy is here. And if he does go on to somewhere else, we have to move forward with our plans.
And interesting in terms of navigating the rest of the season, the Pelicans are in a position where it's almost a make or break spot. They're 5.5 games out of that 8th spot in the Western Conference. And if they fall even further down with Davis out of the lineup right now, that could influence whatever decision they're going to make here moving forward. When you're thinking about deals, David, you're thinking priorities. Your priorities are what here exactly? What do you want to get back? When do you want to get it done?
Well, I think it's interesting because everything in their thought process changed once AD got injured. I think they still were trying to be a buyer potentially at the deadline heading into this next week or so. And now they could very much be thinking of themselves as a seller, which changes everything about the way you look at your team. So to your point about what the team does next, that's a tough issue because you really don't know where you're going to fall in that spectrum, because presumably you've been doing a lot of work relative to lining up what you buy. You haven't really been setting the market in terms of what you sell beyond AD. So from an AD perspective, I think what your criteria need to be are whatever it was that organizationally you and ownership had said unequivocally, these are the must-haves. If what you were wanted to build with was lottery picks, then obviously pick quality needs to be part of that, and you're better off waiting until the draft. If what you wanted to do was put playoff caliber players in there like San Antonio did when they moved Kawhi, then you needed to know who had the DeMar DeRozan type name that was in that conversation. But there are several paths that you can take, and you had to have those deals lined up. And I think if you're looking at what the bare minimum you need to meet is, it's whatever meets your criteria. For me personally, as I look at that, if I was holding their cards, I would probably want to be in a situation where I got at least one young player that projected potentially to be a star, draft picks, an elite role player, somebody that could really further the cause for us as a winner, because when you're bringing more young kids to the fore, you need those guys to galvanize a group.
Griffin, let me ask you this. Good move, bad move. You're right around All-Star break now, and you find out this news about Anthony Davis wanting to move on at the end of the year, whenever it happens. Do you sit down and say, all right, you know what, we don't have him back anymore, and we're not hearing offers that we like? Do you take Anthony Davis along maybe with Holiday and your next best player, and do you unload them right now? Which means the second half of the season, you probably aren't going to be a very good team, but you start out with making your pick that much better.
Boy, I sure don't. I wouldn't go that far, I don't think, in that market. I don't think they could withstand that kind of a rebuild. And frankly, I really am very high on Drew Holiday, by way of example. I don't think you're that terribly far away from being competitive if that's what ownership had set out to be. If what you want to do is start over again, you can still put yourself in a position to play more young kids, recoup young assets down the road for Anthony Davis, and still in the Western Conference not be a playoff team. Your pick's going to be preserved simply by virtue of the fact that this upheaval has happened.
Right. 13th in the West right now, 5.5 games out of the final playoff spot in the Western Conference. And again, Davis is not going to be back anytime real soon, and who knows when, with the trade deadline coming up next